Wednesday, June 21st, 2017 meeting of the Airport Advisory Board, and ask that you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First order of business is roll call. Would you please conduct a roll call, Rundy?
Sure thing. Shannon Stebbins.
Here.
Louis Worthy.
Here.
Steve Huff.
Here.
Mark McKenna. Dave McNary.
Here.
Jeff Sayer. Ben Strader. Bill Boyer.
Here.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is a call to the public. We don't have any public present this evening, so we will move on to the minutes of the May 17th, 2017 meeting, which have been provided to the members of the board. I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes as written.
Mr. Chairman.
Sir.
So moved.
Second,
to approve.
please.
Second.
Any opposed? Minutes are unanimously approved. The next item is communications announcements and airport supervisors report, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Steve Johnson for the supervisors report.
Thank you. You'll all see this is the second time around we have a written report, and I'm going to attempt to do this for you, and we will get better at getting this out to where you can review it maybe a week ahead. That all being said, we have a ACIP, that's a capital improvement plan meeting set up with FAA and ADOT, CNS engineers, and Kaufman Associates, our master plan consultants, and city staff down at the FAA offices in Phoenix on July 26th in the early afternoon. You'll note, I believe on the tail end of this, a CIP list dated May 18th, 2017, and you'll note a number of projects that have all been included in that for your information, with a breakdown of federal and total costs and local costs as well. The current estimate for the FOD grant via ADOT to have 100% design review is the end of this month, June 30th. That'll have the specs and everything, so after ADOT has a little time to review all that, hopefully we'll be going out to bid. The electrical vault project is in review process with the FAA. Again, a number of questions have been raised on that, some on the scope of work, some on other items. Again, we're shooting for the end of this month to have that taken care of. Staff attended the Arizona Airport Managers Conference in the latter part of May in Prescott. One new development is that ADOT has put their pavement maintenance grant program on hold until late 2019. And again, that's the same as their 90% airport improvement grants. That's on hold until late 2019 as well. They're still participating in the 4.5% matching for FAA grants. And again, all of this is due to the legislature sweeping $15 million from them. The other aspect that this has had a problem with is there were a number of airports, Yuma is one that I can think of, that had either just finished construction or were halfway through their projects. So they should have all of those bills paid off by the end of this year. I mean, this was a royal mess. That all being said, and I can't compliment ADOT enough. Most airports, because of this situation, they canceled the projects. If they were done with design, that was the end of it. If it hadn't even been designed, it was just canceled, put on indefinite hold, with the premise that you basically come back to ADOT when they have money for additional project. As you know, we just a few months ago finished our hydrant project, which was ADOT funded. Again, that wasn't a big dollar amount, it was about 40 grand. They allowed us to do that after this whole sweep had happened. And then the FOD project, which is in the range of, I believe, $500,000 or $600,000, they're letting us continue with that. So it's a real blessing that they're working with us because most of their reports, done. Yeah. Let's see, what else? One of the things we found out at the conference, the gentleman who ran the aeronautics branch of ADOT, of course, he got cancer and he has retired. But we didn't realize that he was the only one at ADOT that actually put in the pay requests for these grants. And so the new gentleman, actually not his boss actually, the way they're going to start to approach airport projects once they have funding again for state is they're going to handle them the way they handle highway projects. So as soon as a project is out of the gate, that money's going to be obligated, which, according to what he was saying, means the legislature won't be able to sweep the money, which actually might not be a bad approach to that whole situation. The hangar dynamic at this conference, pretty much same old general information from the FAA. They've been bitten enough to where you know, this policy is going to morph a little bit over time, but they're not going to go out on a limb for anybody and give any advice at this point. One thing that came out in a conference that staff went to, I didn't make it to last week, over in the Los Angeles area, they have, and this is part of the evolving dynamic, they've decided that hangars cannot be used as sort of a moving warehouse. Evidently, they've had some situations in the LA basin where people are using hangars and would move things out, like a moving company or some sort of retail outlet, and they've actually, the policies morphed to where that's no longer allowed. I mean, they're very clear about that. So again, this whole, and it's frustrating, but this whole process continues to change just a wee bit. And you'll see slides to this in a wee bit. We applied a pavement rejuvenator to the taxiway connector for runway 32. I think I've mentioned that when we had our runway overlay grant 3 years ago, the binder that they must have used for the asphalt must have been dirt, or at least a very light oil, because it's all dried up. So all the aggregate basically is popping up. This rejuvenator basically soaks down into the pavement, and for about 4 years, it's locked in. You're in good shape. So we put that product on that area. It seems to be holding. It's doing its thing. So it looks like we have a short-term fix. Again, it's our own money, and it's on us, but that will keep the pavement from bubbling up. Alpha 2 will be the next area we hit with that. The terminal floor, if you come out there, it's going to look like a skating rink. We just had it re-waxed, so it really looks spiffy. We're waiting for the pavement condition report from ADOT. We're guessing we're probably not going to get it till the end of the year because of their staffing dynamic they have going on. 2 weeks ago, we had C-130 make a sharp turn at Alpha 2 and damage the top layer of the pavement, just wiped a little bit of the patina off. So we'll be taking some rejuvenator that we've got going out there, not this week, but probably in a week or so, at 4 in the morning, place it. Of course, it'll be dry probably within 30 minutes given the heat, and we'll be good there. On the 27th, the request you all had for the street renaming for George Molitor, that'll be going to the City Council on the 27th. Hangar 24 has advised, and I think I've mentioned this before, but maybe not, that they're going to be sponsoring an air fest, in other words, an air show at the airport. The date is going to be November 4th. It's a Saturday. The paperwork for military flybys and static aircraft has been signed by me. It's been sent off to the FSDO in Scottsdale. And so I'm guessing in July we'll be going down and having a meeting with them in regards to the details of all that. And then after that forms up, I'll be talking to our tenants about when the airport's going to close and working around that. And again, we're talking about the way I look at it, hours during that day, not the entire day. We've had some complaints from some Shadeport tenants, city Shadeports, where at least one individual wants to park their van in such a fashion to where the sun doesn't get on it at all, which in a Shadeport in this part of the country is, if you can manage that, that's pretty good. The problem is that it basically impacts other people that are parked around him. So I'm going to be coming up with a policy where you pay for a Shadeport spot, and you move your airplane out, and you're going flying. You park your car in your slot. You don't go off to the side. You don't go somewhere else and impact your neighbors. Again, it should be a no-brainer, but we'll see where that goes. We are in the process of cleaning up the parking lot, the central parking lot. We're finding a number of people that don't have stickers, some that we don't think belong out there and aren't paying us. So we'll be cleaning that mess up as we go along. Sent out a clarification letter to our FBOs. Somebody was attempting to get a C-17 in here. And as you all know, a C-17 is a mighty big airplane. Weight-wise, size-wise, we can't handle it. None of our pavement, not even the runway. So there was a little clarifying letter basically saying that you want to bring something in that's big, call staff, and we'll call engineers and we'll get you a number lickety-split. We'll be rotating a street light that's down on the dirt parking lot to the east of Hangar 24 to add a little light at the nighttime for some of the employees that park down there. I'm working with our engineering consultant to see what the cost is and if it's practical to put 3 tie-down spots under the big Shadeport. And then, at least in my mind, on the west side of the Shadeport, maybe a translucent or opaque, I'm going to use the word, which is kind of loose here, fabric that cuts the sunlight that maybe comes down 10 or 11 feet so that that afternoon sun, which is kind of brutal, isn't quite as bad. So I've got that working. D2 is moving forward on their hangar development.
Do you know how many hangars are involved and the cost of that?
The cost, no. And I should have this memorized, but if I recall correctly, it's 3 small executive hangars that are below the fence that runs east-west, that divides the terminal ramp from the main ramp. Then there's going to be a row of nested T's, and then 6 Shadeports, 6 Shadeport slots down on that fence. And then you have the drop-off. I'm thinking on the nested T's, I'm guessing somewhere around 29 or 28 spots. And that appears to be, I mean, he's doing up the plans. They haven't gone to the city yet, but that appears to be a go. He has not mentioned what he's going to be charging for rates on that. On June 14th, Wednesday, power at the airport was down until noon. Actually, it was down from 11 o'clock the night before until noon. There was some buried conduit where 3 wires, Unisource wires, decided to self-combust. And they came out and fixed everything, no cost to us, but we got to have all of our generators kick on, and a number of FBOs couldn't open their big bifold doors because they didn't have any power. So it was an interesting exercise. Some unique airplanes have been in a Lockheed P3, Lockheed Electra, for those of you that remember it, Navy, some Ospreys, and a Marine F-18. You'll see a slide of this. We just repainted the segmented circle. So we should be good there. And then I mentioned air show, which Hangar 24 is going to be putting on November 4th.
Just a couple other items in concert with your report. The local chapter of the 99s is going to host an air race, their second annual Havasu 600 on November 11th. I think that it will start in Borrego Springs again and then end up in Havasu. Also, we have two local 99s that are participating in this year's Air Race Classic, which is a 2,600 nautical mile race that started yesterday in Frederick, Maryland. Went up to Bemidji, Minnesota, and those two participants are presently on the ground in Abilene. Tomorrow it would be Abilene to Ardmore, Oklahoma, flyby to end the race at Albuquerque, and then land at Santa Fe. I'd also like to speak to the towed hang glider that operated here in Havasu during spring break. That created a lot of interest from our weight shift people and all of the local people that fly up and down the lake at 1,000 feet or so. After exchanging several letters with the FAA, they have come to believe that that operation is not, the way it was conducted is not in accordance with the regulations, and they do believe that this operator will have to conform to 14 CFR Part 101. And if the operation returns to Havasu next year, then the FAA will do an investigation and refer it to their legal counsel before the operation is allowed to go on. So it took a while to get the FAA to make a determination, but they have finally done so. Anybody else have any questions?
Mr. Chairman, are you speaking about the ultralights?
There was a towed hang glider operation here that that was launched off of a boat.
Oh, yes, I remember that. Right.
During spring break, it was
Right.
towed to altitudes of a couple of 1,000 feet and then cut loose.
Okay.
The regulation that it has to comply with says that it can't be towed above 150 feet. And between 150 and 500, that tow line has to have streamers on every 50 feet visible from a mile away.
Just like a balloon tethered.
And also from 150 to 500 feet, they have to have a 24-hour prior permission from the FAA airspace owner with specific locations and times for it to take place, and they cannot be within 5 miles of any airport.
Yes, sir.
And the airports that are involved are Lake Havasu Municipal Airport, Chemehuevi Airport, private airport that is halfway down the lake, and the airport that is the Metropolitan Water District Airport. So there's very little parts of the lake that they can operate on at all.
Okay. I have another concern. I don't know if it still exists or not, but there was a gentleman operating a backpack jet pack at speeds up to 100 miles an hour out of Sarah Park. I understand they escorted him out of France, so he decided to come over here and work with that equipment. And he's got an 8-minute duration, not very long, but no predicted flight paths or anything like that. So,
Well, there is a city ordinance that speaks to any aircraft departing from city property has to have permission, so I'm sure that that would fall under that city ordinance.
There's that dynamic. Mr. Huff, when was this? Recently?
this was probably 3-4 weeks ago, roughly.
Okay, that gentleman's been here before, and let's get together. You can give me what you know, and then I'll be calling the FSDO, because the last time he was here, he had to get a special permit from FAA to do that. And I would tend to think that's still the case.
I would believe so. Thank you very much. He launches from a platform. He's got a, yes, and he's got assistance there to switch out the backpack. Apparently the jet motor still runs and stays running while they're switching that out and stuff. So raises some possible safety issues there.
Any other questions or comments from anybody on the board? The public hearings are the next items. During a public hearing, if we have anyone that's in the audience from the public, they're welcome to speak to any item that is a public hearing. The members of the board cannot enter into a two-way discussion with anyone who chooses to speak. However, we can take under advisement anything that's said and bring it up at a future meeting on the agenda. We have no one in the audience this evening, so we can go on to the public hearing portion. The next item is item 7.1. That's election of a chairperson and vice chairperson for the 2017 and 2018 term. So I would entertain nominations.
I would nominate Chairman Stebbins for another term as chair and Lewis as vice chair.
I'd second both of those, Mr. Chairman.
Any other nominations? Mr. Worthy, are you willing to serve again?
It's typical. It's not like I have a choice.
I'm certainly willing to as well. If there's no other discussion, we can just take a voice vote on both of those nominations. Any opposed? And all in favor?
Aye.
Record those votes as unanimously approved.
Yes, I will.
Review of the draft airport vision statement, and I'm going to turn the floor over to Steve Huff. Mr. Strader, who has worked with him on this to some extent, is on business in Phoenix this evening and couldn't join us. So, Mr. Huff, you have the floor.
Yes, sir. The first bullet represented in the handout is what we received from Mr. Strader. I went through some of the vision statements from other airports. I came up with, looks like a half a dozen here right below his statement. These all leading as one vision statement. And then at the bottom, a standalone vision statement with a single bullet. I wrote up, kind of adapted from another airport as well out in Colorado, equal to the size that we have and entertaining general aviation, but not commercial aircraft. So if we want to look these over and possibly discuss them. On the total set of bullets there, the next to the last bullet, use innovation and friendly approaches to deliver world-class service to customers. I kind of like that last instead of next to the last. Below, keeping costs competitive. I just don't want people to stop there and say, oh, keeping costs competitive. I like them to be thinking about the world-class service when they're finished reading that. But I give you these, and I'll turn the floor back over to you, Mr. Chairman.
I appreciate the work that you put into this. For me personally, I still lean towards the mission statement that was presented about 3 months ago that staff generated. I'm afraid that these bullets, especially that bullet, which I like, it almost goes to a mission statement rather than a vision statement. And I'm very sensitive to this board getting into telling staff how to do their mission.
I don't disagree with that theory there. I like it. I would ask, well, okay. I see what you mean, and you don't want to cross the line from vision to mission. I agree with that. I'm not sure the one that we got says everything we need it to, but that's all I have.
Any other discussion? Since we just got this evening, with the board's permission, I'd like to table this for another month and let everybody take a look at it. If you need copies of that vision statement that was presented earlier, we can do that. The airport master plan is upcoming, and I would like to have a very proactive vision statement in place so that it's the first thing that the contractor is going to see when they start working on the airport master plan. In addition, just for me personally, after going through the budget and looking at lots of numbers, I see the number that concerns me most is the justification for the funds that come to the airport out of the general fund. And of course, how we arrive at that is another discussion, but in the opinion of our last operations manager, the airport was putting in excess of $30 million a year directly into the economy at Lake Havasu. And that's a pretty good value for the $360,000 or so that the general fund supplemented that budget with. It's a very good payback ratio in my view. So my hope is that the master plan certainly has to lay the groundwork for us to go to the FAA for a lot of grant money on pavement. But I hope that it will also answer somewhat more definitively the economic impact or the value of the airport to the city of Lake Havasu, so that we can see that we're getting a bargain for the money that we spend on the airport. So without objection, I'd like to table this for future discussion next month.
Yes, I move that we table this till next month.
Second.
Any opposed? Unanimously approved. The next item is a review of the draft tenant mailing letter regarding the hangar use policy, and I ask Mr. Johnson to go over that, and if you would talk about what the letter's for and what it addresses.
All right. Yeah, you'll note a copy of the letter there in your packets. It got adjusted at the last minute, so I do apologize for that. Attached to it, you'll notice the storage policy that you all approved a meeting back. The intent with this, and you'll note on the letter that I have a Saturday in July that I didn't put the date in, where we have a public meeting at the terminal. And again, not the first weekend in July because everybody's going to be on holiday, but maybe the middle of the month or towards the end of the month. The goal is to send the letter off with the policy attached, have a public meeting for people to ask questions and raise concerns. After the meeting, allow about 30 days for this all to percolate down to our tenants, since we have a number of snowbirds and not everybody's here at this point, given this wonderful heat we're dealing with. And then begin inspections with the city hangars on the main ramp. That's where we'll start. I'll be contacting the fire department probably in a day or two to basically try to do a double deal here where I go out on the inspections and the fire's with me. So we're covering both ends of the spectrum. We will attempt to schedule with each tenant and have them on site when we're doing this. And again, there'll be at least 2 of us, maybe 3 of us. It won't be a one-person dynamic as far as the inspections go. We'll have the inspections. We'll mark up anything that we think is an issue. We'll give people 30 days to address the issues. And I think that's pretty typical with the fire department as well. At that point, we'll re-inspect, and then from that point, we'll see where things take us. And that's sort of an overview of what we think the process is going to be like.
So in essence, this is the final part of the plan that we decided to execute several months ago on implementing the hangar use policy enforcement. Our next meeting is Wednesday, July 19th. I would suggest that the Saturday following that might be a good time to have this meeting. And we also, I will see what it takes to get the notices for that put into the local newspaper and perhaps do a small article on the hangar use. And we certainly would like to get as many people there as possible and invite all the board members to come as well, because we need to to be prepared to answer questions, and of which I think there would be many.
The other thing we'll do as well is we will do a simple mail-out notice, just a notice, to all of our tenants as well. And not just the people that we initially are going to inspect in the city hangars, but all of our tenants.
Right.
The FBOs, the private hangars that came up from the lake, everyone.
It's my understanding that this letter was staffed and is now approved by staff. And for us, it's just a recommendation to accept it and as part of the pathway forward to put the hangar use policy into effect. So I would entertain any, if we have any discussion, now's the time.
I have a question, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Johnston. Mr. Johnston, can you tell me, once they go past that 30 days, if they have not complied, do we have any teeth to enforce, evict them or make them comply?
In the city hangars, when you get into some of the other hangars, it's going to get complicated and time consumptive. The city hangars are month-to-month agreements, so we can go down that road. I really don't want to, but if we have somebody and clearly, and again, I think we've talked about this over and over again, this is not what I'll call a Glendale witch hunt. You know, if there's an airplane and there's some other ancillary stuff in there, I don't have an issue. But if you open the hangar door and it's household goods stacked to the ceiling, which, and I'm not a fireman, and I'll be very upfront about that, but I think you get into fire hazards, you get into all sorts of other strange stuff, especially being considerate of your neighbors on either side of you in those hangars, then that's pretty straight. Regardless of whether somebody's been here since we built those hangars, whenever that time frame was, 15, 20 years ago, I don't know, then it's a matter of, nope, it needs to be moved out and it needs to have an aviation use. So and I don't particularly want to go down this path, but the path basically is 30 days to fix it. And if it's not fixed, then indeed, we go the next step.
Certainly the goal is to educate and then seek voluntary compliance with the federal
Exactly.
rules. That's absolutely the goal. It's not to dictate anything. It's just to comply with the federal rules and to get those rules out in the public so everybody's aware of them and comply with them and just go on about life.
Right, I agree with that, Mr. Chairman. I was kind of mentally thinking about just the person that is trying to comply. They've called in a half a dozen storage areas, and I'm trying to get a place for my stuff. He goes past that 30 versus somebody that's just hunkered down and being non-compliant. Do we have, some
Well,
kind of lever to get them out of there?
If we have a hangar that's being used for storage and not aircraft use, then they don't have a leg to stand on, in my view. They need to become in compliance, but we don't have a lot of that. We don't anticipate finding a lot of it, maybe one or two. So I think that without going down that rabbit hole, that's going to have to be left up to staff how to deal with it on a case-by-case basis, I would think.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an individual dynamic, and sort of what you all are talking about, we're all dancing around is, okay, is somebody basically going to be sitting in the hangar with their shotgun and basically say, I'm not doing anything, or are they going to try to cooperate? And if there's some cooperation, then yeah, I think we can work, not to the point of, oh, it's going to take like 16 months or 2 years or something like that. But no, I mean, as the chairman said, I think it's going to be a case by case. Is somebody trying to work with you, or are they just dead set against it?
Any more discussion or questions?
No, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
I'd entertain a motion to support this letter from staff to be sent to the tenants of Lake Havasu City Airport.
I second the motion.
Okay, so moved.
All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Unanimously approved. The next item is a review of the
Mr.
pavement
Chairman?
condition. Sir,
We did decide on this, the Saturday, after the next meeting, so that would be July 22nd?
that's up to the airport staff, I
Yeah.
think, but that would be my recommendation, because then we'd
tentative?
have another meeting.
Okay, thank you.
We'd have another meeting before then to help get the word out even more. The next item is review of the airport condition report. And this is the report of 2014, is that correct?
No, this is a little bit of history from me that I could dig up. Actually, yes, it is I apologize. It is the 2014 ADOT report that we got. And I'll try to go through this relatively quickly. For the last few years, ADOT, about every 2 years, comes out and they do a pavement condition survey, and they do it with all the airports in state. And I think by now we've had any 3 or 4 cycles. So all airports have a pretty good sense of what's going on with their pavement. Pavement Condition Index, PCI, is what you're going to see in here. And as you read down the memo, you'll basically see that there's routine maintenance, which is 100 to 86 PSI, pavement preservation, which is 85 to 56 PSI, and then major rehabilitation, which is basically 55 and below. That's where your pavement's toast. That all being said, you'll note on the second page there, we have areas at the airport that are broken out, and we have PCI numbers that are attached to those. And again, this is via the state. The only one there that's a wee bit suspect in my mind is the runway and the taxiway connectors to the runway, because as I mentioned earlier, that overlay they didn't hold, and so everything's popping up. So the fact they gave us 100 for a PCI, when we get the next report, which will probably be late this year from ADOT, I suspect that 100 is going to be much lower, because it's not normal for payment to only last 3 years before the aggregate starts to pop up. So that's the only suspect number in that whole lot. And again, anything where you're getting into the 55, that's sort of the danger zone. And you're going to see that there are some, and this is back in 2014, and we're 3 years on. And when pavement starts to degrade, it's not a nice linear slope that you can sort of look at. It's logarithmic, which means when it goes quick. So you'll note with those numbers, we have some serious pavement work to do eventually. You'll also note that I go into a little bit of the history. In the early 1990s, basically the pavement coefficient was about 100,000 pounds. The majority of the airport was built as a GA airport, general aviation airport. And so beyond the runway and maybe the ramp next to the terminal, as far as we can find, we believe that those other areas were built to a 12,500 pound weight spec, which covers most of your GA airplanes, general aviation. But when you start getting into any of the big stuff, you're getting a little bit beyond that. You'll note on the last page, our fleet mix is changing. We are getting larger aircraft, typically military, but not all the time. And at least with the business jets, and for that matter, the military, there's a direct benefit to the community. Now, can I, at this point, tell you what that benefit is? No. But I know that in a number of instances, these operators have leased hotel rooms or condominiums. They have been here in some cases when we had the helicopter manufacturers. They were here for a month or two. And we're talking about 30 people from Europe. And this went on for 7 years. So, I mean, it's a hefty amount of money. So these larger aircraft, that's not a bad thing. That's actually a good thing. Historically, since I've been here, we've used state and federal grants from the FAA and ADOT, in a sense, to maintain the pavement. Now, is that what you're supposed to do? No. But that's what we've done. The only projects I could find any historical documentation to of a major sense was before the runway was lengthened in the late 1890s? I don't think so. In the late 1990s, a pavement rejuvenator product was put down the entire runway, which caused complaints because that time the wind was blowing to the south, and I guess it just smelled horrid. And then about maybe 15 years ago or thereabouts, we had a poorly done crack sealing project. And those were our money. That wasn't grant money. That was local money. Beyond that, we've not done a whole lot of maintenance. And that's one of the reasons for this report, is to give you an idea that we need to get on that trail and start doing more maintenance. The draft CIP project list, we're talking about a master plan. Right now, that list, which went to the city council, didn't include any other projects. That's not how the granting agencies work, FAA or ADOT. They want to see projects on all of that. Again, the master plan is key with this because it's going to give us an idea what this new pathway is going to be for us. Whether it's air carrier service, and that might be something further down the road, whether it's these larger aircraft or what have you. And so we have that going. And I mentioned the low values on the PCI. Again, the state grants, just to give you a sense on that, we really need that assistance because typically it's anywhere from 90 if it's ADOT to 95% if it's ADOT and FAA. If you do the right accounting and it's a lower grant number, you can use some of your administrative costs and do that against your match. But they're key. If the city had to fund all of these improvements itself, it'd be difficult. Rondi, could you put those pictures back up just for a second? And I'll run by what was running while I was talking here. That is by the air freight gate. That's ramp that's been used as a roadway, so it's alligated, which means the pavement in the sub-base is done. Not a large area, but something we need to consider fixing up. That is an example of that poor crack sealing project. That's down by the air freight area. It's like they took hot tar mix from a roof project and just put it in cracks, which is not what you do. That is on Charlie Taxiway. That's about a 5.5-inch crack. Something like that, we'd have to saw cut it out and put in some cold mix to fix that. That's near Alpha 2. I believe that's probably about almost a 3-inch crack. And these, I'm showing you the worst of the worst. I mean, not everything we have out there is this bad. That's across from the north ramp on Alpha Taxiway, probably 2-inch. And you'll note for scale, I like the stick hammers and other things in cracks. My hand on that one, again, that's on Alpha Taxiway as well. That's the segmented circle I was talking about earlier that we just repainted. That's so you can see that probably from Mars. That is the new markings for the Alpha 1 taxiway connector where we did the rejuvenator product. That's it before we applied the stripes. And there they are putting it on. They put 500, it wasn't tons. Remind me what it was, Rondi. 500 gallons?
Gallons.
Gallons of this stuff down. It sucked it up, which again gives you an idea that the pavement was really, really dry. That's the crack sealant. That whole process, we rent a trailer. I think it's $5,000 a pop. They bring it up from Phoenix. We go out, and I'm trying to remember now if it was 1,200 to 1,300 linear feet of cracks we filled, but that was all done in the period of a morning. The way we used to do it was sort of the 1890s, get a bunch of laborers with hammers and beat the pavement into the crack. We don't do that. This is it's costly, but it's very quick. And we did this up on the northern part of the Alpha Taxiway.
So based on these PCI numbers, we basically have a lot of pavement that was put down in 91 or 92 when the airport was moved, and it's had little or nothing done to it since. Is that true?
That's my understanding, yes, from the documentation you can find at this point, and the 10 years I've been here.
So the challenge is the master plan will take a couple of years, and then probably at least 2 years beyond that to get any actionable federal grant money on the ground. So what we'd have to do is come up with budget money to make this last until we can start to repair it with federal grant dollars. Is that correct?
I would add to that and say that we need to continue to utilize the system. And so my suggestion in there would be we go after a master plan, which we set the, what's the term? We set the bait last year with our meeting with FAA and ADOT. They basically said, no, you need a master plan, because I was asking for pavement improvements then. So they seem to be up for the idea. So that's the first thing. The second thing is in our project management list, if not a year out, within 2 years, we start loading up projects. And just off the top of my head, I would say the first thing would be engineering and design on Alpha Taxiway for an overlay. And so that's the 3rd year out. Maybe some light projects for the 2nd year out. The master plan's already in process. That's being worked. The 4th year out, I would say construction of either an overlay and design on the runway, or I would say construction of Taxiway Alpha. And we basically back these projects up. The only thing that's going to be tough, again, until 2000, well, actually 4.5, no, the state will have money. These will be expensive projects. So, you know, maybe the year 3 and year 4, we're talking millions of dollars here. But again, if the FAA is willing to step up and give us a 90% or 91% grant, and the state can also hit us with a 4.5, okay, the local impact isn't going to be that tough. But I would suggest part of this dynamic, and you hit most of it, is also loading up that project CIP list. So one, the FAA and the state can start to plan for this and start to look for money to basically fund this. And then we, as you were alluding to, start going out there and we start doing this maintenance that traditionally we haven't done. And that's crack filling and saw cutting some of those areas. And again, the highest use areas first. Some areas like Charlie Taxiway, when the FAA's been out here in the past, they look at that and say, why did we build this? And the premise at the time was we were going to have MD-80s and we're going to have a big new terminal on that big mound to the south of where the current terminal is. Well, MD-80s are going out of service. The pavement out there, it hasn't failed, but by the time we get to it, it might. And so again, from the master plan standpoint, okay, what do we really want to do there? Do we still want to land bank that for a future terminal and larger aircraft, or what? And so
Well, I
that
think we
whole
have to-
master plan is really key
We
with
have to
this
be very
piece.
careful with this because Taxiway Charlie, while it doesn't support MD-80s, it does support the weight shift people and keep them off the runway. So it's a very important piece of pavement at the airport for safety.
It's the one area out there that in the last 3 or 4 years, those 1890s laborer, I'm trying to use correct, politically correct terms in today's world, labor dynamic of going out there and beating the asphalt in, that's where we did a lot of this test and found that method, one, is not cost effective. It's hard on your personnel. And after about 2 years, because of the shrinkage coefficients of what's there and what you're putting in, doesn't work. This new product seems to be a far better product to do that with. But yeah, it's not as if we're going to look the other way. I mean, we want to save as much of this pavement as we can. So it's sort of a three-prong approach from my viewpoint anyway.
Any other questions on the pavement condition report? Okay, the next agenda item is the airport budget. We talked about this with a great presentation from the finance director, and I have more questions than I have answers about this. Open it up to anybody on the board for any questions that you might have concerning the budget or the budget process. I'm interested in figuring out how much we have spent in the past on maintenance, just put back reinvestment into the airport by our community, our city, and looking forward, what we're going to need for the next 2 or 3 years to keep up what we have long enough to try to get it replaced with federal dollars. Can you speak to that from the budget we have?
I can speak to some of that, and then I'll have to get back to you on some. You'll note the paper that we provided. The last sheet basically is straight from one of our general budget sheets. And again, this is for this year. This isn't for the coming year. That budget has not been adopted and probably won't for another, actually a couple of weeks, I think. But this is sort of current as opposed to future. What I did here basically was focus in on maintenance items. And then you'll note the other pieces of paper you have here, sheets 1 and 2, is a breakdown. And all of the items that basically we've charged against those line items. Repair and maintenance, maintenance ops supplies, miscellaneous supplies predominantly. What you'll note there as you read down is, well, that about 20 in total, I think about $29,000 roughly was spent total on airport maintenance in those items. When you start to look at the line items, you'll see armor fence. That's where we fixed a large hole that we had down by the large hangars that were just built on Site 4. Those two numbers basically total about $4,700. The second page, you'll see Brewer Coat. That was the crack seal, and actually I was wrong in what I told you earlier. It's about $2,500, not $5,000 when they bring up that little trailer. And then Fastline was the rejuvenation product that we use, which is just under $5,000. So when you add those up from a maintenance standpoint, as opposed to, well, an airfield maintenance standpoint, and we're talking, fence and pavement, so security and pavement, that's about $12,000 roughly. The rest of the items you see here are just the paint for the segmented circle, and just any ancillary kind of maintenance doing business dynamics we're talking.
So it's just normal housekeeping expense.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, the one thing I don't think we did here was I did not include any of the janitorial supplies and all that, because I kind of figured you wanted to focus on airfield maintenance per se. But what you'll see there basically is using those numbers, 12,000 versus 29, that we used about 42%, a little under 42% of our maintenance funds to make airfield maintenance dynamic. And then the other items were just, I won't say the cost of doing business, but, minor, well, they're not minor, but just the typical, air conditioning units have to be fixed every now and then, things of that nature.
Any other questions or comments by board members? Anyone? Do you think that next month we might be able to take a look historically at what we've done for the last 8 or 9 years, just based on maintenance of where we've been, and then maybe take a guess at where we need to be next year or 2 years out?
The guess, we can come up with something as far as and I'm using the wrong term here because I'm not an accountant, but bear with me. A trend analysis from, say, 2002, maybe every 2 or 3 years, up to about 2015, we can work something up. We have those numbers. I've not actually looked at the numbers, so I don't know where that trend will take us, but that should be easy to get together. And actually, I can talk to our engineer, airport engineer down in Phoenix, and get an idea from them as well, because they've been up here, they've seen the pavement.
Very well. For some reason, we've run longer this evening than any airport meeting that I have attended. So we'll bring that to a close, and we'll talk about it next month. Future agenda items. Does anyone on the board have items that they'd like to see on the future on next month's agenda? I think we talked about we would have the vision statement on the next month's agenda and the budget for sure, and then we can leave the rest of it open for discussion through the month. The next meeting is Wednesday, July 19th at 2017 at 5:30, and we certainly would like to invite any tenant from the airport to attend the meeting, and we can discuss during the meeting or after the meeting at length any questions that you have about the hangar use policy and what can and cannot be stored in your hangar. At this time, I'd certainly like to have a motion to adjourn.
I'd make that motion.
Second? Without objection, meeting's adjourned. Thank you, gentlemen.